the week. So basically, I'll just go ahead and introduce myself. Yona Weiss. Actually, before I do that, let me just click the go live over here. No, I can't even do that. I think I messed up. I wanted to go live on Facebook, but I messed it up. So basically what I want to do is I want to just share with you guys every week, bring someone special, a speaker who's going to give some incredible value, some information that we can learn from. And then at the same time, we can do a little networking, besides the question and answer. And, this time beforehand, we actually break off into the breakout rooms afterwards, and that I think is a great way for us to get to know each other in kind of more intimate level, one by one. So a little bit about me, Yona Weiss. By day, I do cost segregation, so I help real estate investors extensively lower their income tax liability through an incredible platform, cost segregation, accelerated depreciation. And by night and by the rest of the time, I spend the time on LinkedIn. I'm launching tomorrow morning, launching Weiss Advice. Some podcast is it's big news. It's finally coming out on all the platforms. You can go and search that out over there. It's not a regular real estate podcast, okay? It's not one of those ones where we're going to have people come in and tell you the subject matter. If you want to learn different subject matter stuff, I think that's what this platform is for. We're bringing experts like Mauricio. We're going to learn stuff. We're going to network together. The podcast is really just me getting to know people and so talking to some of the most successful people that I know just about life and about business, and really kind of finding the other side of the people. And I think this business is more about the people than it is anything else. And a lot of that gets lost, in my opinion, in just these subject matter podcasts where we're just like, kind of hearing the same thing from different people at the time. So I really hope you guys check that out. I think it's going to be an awesome podcast where I interviewed like 25 people. It's been incredible, and I'm really excited about that. So without further ado, a little introduction about Mauricio. If you don't know who Mauricio is until this point, I think you guys are going to be pleasantly surprised with today's presentation, because I've heard him speak on several occasions and, just been blown away every single time. So a little bit about Mauricio. If you guys signed up for that, maybe you read the bio, but he's a syndication attorney. He's the founder and CEO of Premier Law Group. 100% of his practice is in syndications with real estate investors. So over 20 years of securities experience and, specializing in the Reg D exempt operation offerings. So he's really a rising star. He's someone that has worked with tons of syndicators. He's an incredible speaker, as you'll see. He's shared the stage with tons of experts in the industry, whether it's Robert Kiyosaki and the real estate guy, Brad Summer. You guys can check out. He's been on tons of podcasts. I don't need to say too much more about him because I think you'll just know. We'll put his contact information, so you guys can reach out to him afterwards if you do have any follow-up questions. And I think the way we're going to go about doing this, Mauricio, love you to present. If you have slides, if you don't, whatever way you want to go ahead and present that, for about half an hour, 40 minutes, 45 minutes or so, and then we'll take questions and answers. If anyone has questions throughout, you put it in there in the chat box. And without further ado, let's
Thanks, man. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the intro, and thanks everyone for. I always say this. I'm always amazed at how many people turn out to listen to a lawyer of all things. So I have actually put some slides together. If you guys have seen me before, I'm a flip chart guy. So I'm usually having my flip chart and markers, and I haven't been super consistent. So Yona, don't scream at me, but I have this thing called Flip Chart Fridays, but I haven't really been super consistent lately. But I'm more of a flip chart guy because I don't like, there's a joke that we say, I don't like the agenda to get in the way with what I came to say. So the flip chart gives me the flexibility of going in whatever direction I want, especially if there's questions, and I really would love to do. I know we are going to do Q&A. So I put together some slides. It's one of the benefits of one of the few benefits of this whole COVID-19 thing is it's forced me to put together some slides. And so I put a few slides together, but really what I want to do is Q&A at the end. So I'll try and fly through these. I don't want to spend a ton of time on the slides, but I want to give you guys, give some context. So let me just share my screen. Yona, you have to allow me to do that, I believe.
Oh, yeah, sorry, you're right. You're right. I hit the wrong button there.
There we go. All right. So let's see here if this works. Here we go. Let's see. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. Whoops. Let me start the slideshow. So, yeah, you and I talked a little bit ahead of time, and we wanted to focus a little bit more on the raising money on social media thing. Obviously, Yona is a master at social media, especially on LinkedIn. I think we're doing this on Facebook Live too. So all of that stuff is great. And so we want to do that. But my goal really is two things. I still want to give you guys kind of an overview, a quick overview, because that'll give you some context of where this all fits. Because I always say, the legal piece, the syndication is this puzzle, right? And the legal is just one of the many pieces that you have in a syndication when you're pooling money, raising money to go do your deals. And so, your job is not to know every single statute or every single rule or whatever. You just need to understand the context, where it all fits into the big picture. At the end of the day, you're the quarterback, you're the whatever you want to call yourself, you're the quarterback of everything. So I still want to give you the overview, and I'll try and fly through that. But I think that's important when we get to talk about the second thing, which I want to talk about, which is obviously how to use social media. It'll make more sense as to where it all fits. And if we can walk away today with you just at least understanding, oh, I get it now, there's this big picture thing, and this is where this fits in, I'm going to feel pretty good about it. So I won't spend too much time on here. I've been doing this for a while. As Yona said, 100% of my practice is syndication. So that's all I do. We do have a real estate attorney on in-house as well, a transactional / real estate, Carrie, who's a freaking rock star, but I don't do any of that stuff. That all goes to Carrie. So I do the syndication piece. And I do help, let me move this over here. I do help syndicators, just stay compliant with securities laws, help them stay out of jail, as I like to joke. Oops, let me just do this. I've been doing this for a while, and I do tend to travel. I think I saw Yona. Well, actually, you came to my neck of the woods last time in LA, and we saw each other at I think the Rod Khleif event. So I do this, and I'm also known as kind of the anti-lawyer, and you'll probably get a little bit if you haven't seen me before. In fact, one of my good friends, Tom Muirley, likes to say I'm one of the few lawyers that actually speaks English. So that's kind of my thing. I've come to learn that that's something I can do. And so I'm going to try and use that today to just show you how all of this fits together. Why is always my SEC question. Like, we're talking about, most of us are talking about real estate, or we're investing in, I heard some opportunity zones, I'm hearing single family, like all this stuff. And the first thing that comes to mind is, why is the SEC even involved? And that's because of this little line that I always go to, which is, anytime you're taking money from investors where the returns are generated by your efforts. So anytime you have passive investors, you are issuing securities, even though it doesn't sound that way. And that's why the SEC is involved, the Securities and Exchange Commission, because you are selling securities when you're raising money. And really, three things you have to worry about. That's it. Three things when you recognize that you are selling securities. We've got to, number one, register that with the SEC, or we have to find an exemption to registration, or it's illegal. It's that simple. Register, find an exemption, it's illegal. Now, obviously, we don't want to do illegal stuff, so I don't usually spend too much time on that, although illegal stuff can also include, not putting together the right documents, not disclosing. It doesn't have to be Bernie Madoff, fraud stuff. It can be other things that you don't think about. But in general, nobody's raising money or doing these deals intentionally defrauding investors. But so, failing to disclose is a way to do an illegal offering. Advertising when you're not supposed to, and that's really what we're going to focus on today. Paying people to raise money for you, that's another big one that Yona knows. I spend a lot of time on social media hammering on that. And then referral fees are another one that kind of ties to number 3. So these are all examples of situations where you wouldn't be doing anything fraudulent. You wouldn't be trying to steal your investors' money or doing a Ponzi scheme or something like that, which is what you usually see on the news. But all these things could consider that being an illegal offering. And we don't want to register. Registration basically means you're going public. You're spending, a lot of time, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, putting this through the process, spending 6-7 figures. Like, you just don't have time for that. Like, if you're in a contract on a building, you got to close in 60, 90 days. You don't have 2 years to sit around waiting for the SEC to approve your deal. So that's why we always focus on exemptions, which is what I do. I focus 100% of my time on finding the proper exemption for your registration. And luckily for us, there's really three, and I'll fly through these, but there's you probably heard of these, the 506B, 506C, and this relatively new Reg A Plus are by far the more common exemption. So even though there's a ton of them, and sometimes you forget about it, but there's certainly more than these, but these are the ones that honestly between the, I mean, look, number one is probably 90 to 95% of people use that one. So that's the one that we usually talk about. And the reason they're so popular, real quick, is that they're safe harbors, meaning if we comply with all the rules in that Rule 506B or whatever, we don't have to worry about the states, which is a big deal. Like, we don't want to have to go hire an attorney in California and Florida and Texas because we have investors there and try and somehow figure out, because they're all going to have different rules, how do we make them all mesh together? We just want to be worried about one set of rules, which is the federal rules, and not really worry about the states, other than some notice requirements. You still have to file some forms there, and obviously, or maybe not obviously, you still can't commit fraud. So anti-fraud, if you commit fraud, the states will have something to say about it. But absent that, we're typically just looking at the states, which is why, and by the way, I just flipped that over, by the way, that didn't make any sense. So the second one was the states. The first one was the safe harbor, which just meant really, if we comply with all the terms, which we're going to get to in a second, you're assured of being in compliance with that rule. There's no guesswork. Like, if I hit these points, I'm good. And so certainty is always important. And then the second one is the preemption, is really what I was talking about. Preemption means I don't worry about state law because federal law will preempt state law. And those are the reasons these are so popular. I do this side-by-side comparison. I'm not really going to focus on 506C because 506B is where the social media thing comes into play. Because when you're doing a 506B, as you can see in the screen, these are the bullet points. There's not that many, right? Unlimited amount of money, which is why you can raise $1 million, 10 million, 100 million, $1 billion, 20 billion, doesn't matter. You can use this exemption. You can take up to 35 non-accredited investors, which is one of the reasons it's so popular. Accredited investors, if you recall, or just to remind you, are people who have either $1 million in net worth, excluding their primary residence, or they have earned $200,000 a year the last couple of years. So in this case, it would be 2018 and 2019, and have a reasonable expectation of earning that much this year. And if you're combining it with your spouse, that number actually goes up to 300,000. But that's nice. If you're starting out, or you've got friends and family, and Aunt Karen that you want to invite to your deal isn't accredited, you can use 506B. You can get up to 35. But the next one is where it comes in, right? You cannot advertise and you cannot generally solicit when you're doing a 506B. And solicitation, I always think of going to conferences, like, Yona and I met last time we saw each other at the conference. Actually, I think that was the first time we met in person. I can't go with my business plan to that conference and just start passing out the business plan and hey, look, I've got a great deal, right? That's the solicitation piece. And then obviously the advertising is just that. We cannot go on a podcast and pitch. I couldn't come on this great venue and be like, hey, oh, by the way, I've got a great deal. Let me give you the points of it. Can't do that. In general, as you can see, you must have a pre-existing relationship, a substantive relationship with the investors, which is why it's known as kind of the friends and family. You've already got to know them, whether they're workers, co-workers, friends. You've already had a relationship. And there's a couple of things that we talked about, the preemption. But this is why I wanted to go through these things, because in this big context, most of you that have this issue, you're going to be relying on a 506B exemption. And one of those prohibitions is the prohibition of advertising. And so that's why the question comes up, or really not the question, I've just been seeing so much of it, is what can I post on social media so that it's not considered advertising? Because if I just blurb stuff about my deal, there's a good chance that's going to be considered advertising. And if that becomes advertising, I've blown my 506B exemption. And now I go back all the way to the beginning, which is, okay, I've got to register, find an exemption, or it's illegal. And so if I can't rely on 506B, I better have another exemption to rely on. Otherwise, I'm SOL, because I clearly did not register the syndication. So that's why it's super important. And that's why I wanted to kind of build it up to that point, because I wanted to make sure you guys understood where this comes in. So social media, then, I always think of these things, and I compartmentalize everything. When I write stuff, sometimes it's the good, the bad, the ugly. And for this one, I just came up with these 3 buckets in my head, because there are things that you clearly can do on social media. There are things you clearly cannot do on social media. And then there's this gray area, which is really the frustrating part, because And I'll tell you why. I think actually, when you think about it, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all these things, the prior recession, I mean, forget about the one that we just started, but the prior recession was in 2007, 2008, right? And back then, I don't remember exactly how Facebook was doing, but it certainly wasn't what it is today. And so we haven't really had any issues with this problem because things have been going so well. You could be violating these rules all day long and you're not going to get quote unquote caught. I don't think anybody's at the SEC going through your Facebook accounts looking for this stuff. It's usually an add-on, like there's a complaint and they open up an audit and they'll add this up. But there haven't been too many complaints because everything's been going great. So I always thought that once the next recession happened and things started going a little bit sideways, people started complaining. That's when this would happen. And I guess we're there now. And so we'll see what happens, I guess, since we just started. But the first thing oh, look at that bottom right. I missed that one. The usual disclaimer, not disclaimer, that's not the right word. I recommend that if you have an active deal, meaning you're raising money right now for a deal, I would just stay off of social media. That's my general recommendation. Yes, you can post about your cats. Yes, you can post about, Yona, you're launching your podcast. That's all good. But I would stay away of being anything relating to real estate if that's what you're raising money, or anything that could even possibly be argued that you're kind of trying to sneakily, that's even a word, get around this rule. Just stay off of it. I am a big believer that the time to really add to your list and get to know more people and enter into those substantive relationships are in between deals, or if you haven't done a deal before your first deal. The way it typically works is you have a list, you have people that so when you find the deal, you're already there. You don't go find a deal, put it into contract, and then be like, okay, I got to go find $1 million. That's typically not the way. I mean, it's a really stressful way to live. You want to have this thing already built up. And so in between deals is when you want to be doing what I'm about to show you, things that I think you're okay with doing. Not to say you cannot get away with doing it while active. I just think you're playing with fire. And because of the gray areas, I'm not sure it's worth it. And I'm also not sure how successful. I mean, some people may invest, but I mean, if you've never met somebody, I don't know what the odds are of somebody investing if they just saw some Facebook post or whatever in that particular deal. That's really for you to get into a relationship and then do the next one. So here are things, as you can see, my Shutterstock amazing things you clearly cannot do. These are obviously directly pitch your deal. You just cannot get on social media and be like, hey, I just got in a contract for a 100-unit apartment building and I'm raising $1 million, call me. I hope that's relatively obvious, but I needed to post it there. The tricky part is this concept of conditioning the market. We didn't really talk about the definition of a security. I kind of gave you my cheat sheet, but the definition of a security is really broad. And that's why people get caught up in thinking they're not even doing a syndication when they are, because the definition of a security is really broad. Well, similarly here, the definition of advertising, or really technically what an offer is extremely broad. And so anything that drums up excitement or gets people pumped about your deal through that post is potentially conditioning the market. Let me give you an obvious one, then I actually pulled some examples as well. But an obvious one would be you go on Yona's podcast and I don't talk about my deal specifically, but I'm like, hey, we're so awesome. We usually get investors 15, 20% returns. Or we're really that good. We're consistently giving you 20% IRR. That's conditioning the market. That's telling the market, hey, you're really good. And the next time you have a deal, then I'm going to call this person because they're doing, they've got these great returns. That would be an example of conditioning market. I pulled, but anything that drums up business, and people try and get sneaky about this. And so they're like, my favorite one is, and I'll use this example to show you how you can do it as well. But my favorite is sort of the due diligence posts, right? Somebody's in contract, they're going to visit the property, they're doing their due diligence, they do a Facebook Live or a video, and then, hey, we're here in Houston in our 100, this is an amazing property, and somewhere in that thing there's reference to, that they're doing a deal, or it's obvious, you can tell from the post, even they may not specifically reference it, you can tell they're raising money for this deal and they're open for business. That would be an example of conditioning the market, which is why I think it's a little bit dangerous. There's a way that I'll talk to you about the next one where you could take that same thing and do it in such a way that it would not be considered conditioning the market. But that's the tricky part, is the conditioning the market. I pulled a couple of examples and I tried to blur this out. And if whoever's on this, if this is somebody that's on the call, I really apologize. But it is public It is public stuff. And as a disclaimer, I'm not saying this particular post is illegal, by the way, or no, I shouldn't say illegal, violates the rules, because this could be a 506C, right? This could be a post that this thing you may be allowed. But if they're doing a 506B, this is problematic because they're talking about specific returns. So-and-so delivers a 20%, 26% ROI, 21% IRR, our property so-and-so sold. If you're interested in partnering with us on the future, check out, and it's a website. That's clearly, that falls into my book, the first category, which is we're directly pitching a deal. If you're interested in partnering with us, call me. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Here's another one. Again, this may be totally fine if it's a 506C, but if it prohibits advertising, I can't see the top of it, but through so-and-so, we will be expanding our national footprint, continue to provide an outstanding living experience to our residents. It's a privilege to provide the opportunity to invest. To learn more about the investment opportunity, visit our webpage, blah, blah, blah. And I clicked on that webpage, and there's basically an executive summary on the deal. So that's another example of a pretty direct one. Here's one that's a little bit sneakier, but I still think this is crossing the line. This person's not talking about their particular deal. They're talking, it looks like a prior acquisition, right? So it says on this President's Day, blah, 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 this video reviews an acquisition that we did that has an affordable housing restriction. We explain the pros and cons, blah, 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 but learn how to qualify for a passive investment in so-and-so apartment building and they give you the link. So this may be, again, a way for people, wow, this was really good. He's doing a really good job on this 14 unit. This is great. I reach out to you. That's going to be conditioning the market. So those are the things you just want to be careful about, which is why, as you can see, what does conditioning the market mean? It's very vague. It's very, it's open for interpretation, which again, if you have an active deal, I think it's easier to make the connection. Well, the reason you did this post was for people to get to your investment. If you don't have a deal, it's a little bit harder for the government or a regulator to claim that you were conditioning the market for your deal because you don't have a deal. So clearly I wasn't, conditioning the market. I don't have an offer. So how can I be advertising something if I don't have anything? That's kind of the idea. It is possible, but that's why I think you're much safer to do these kind of posts or any type of post that kind of conditions the market or maybe potentially conditions the market when you don't have a deal. And this would be actually a great example of, educating the public on, how to do deals. Again, if you don't have one and it's not obvious, I mean, here it's, if you learn how to qualify for passive investment. So what are the things that are definitely okay on social media? The first thing is factual information. This is kind of a boring one, but the SEC has clearly stated that factual information about you and your company is fine. The SEC recognizes that you have a business to run, and so if you put your bio about how experienced you are, and again, a little bit boring stuff, but if you want to do that, or have a website that's compliant. And by the way, this all applies to websites too, because websites are public. So unless you've got a password protected, but if you want to put your website about, information about your strategies and why real estate, all that stuff, and you want to link it, that's fine. Not too sexy, but that's something you can definitely do. What you really can do is what Yona does such an amazing job at, which is value add, right? There's nothing wrong with you putting together some type of information that adds value, that doesn't reference your deal or doesn't reference past deals. But for example, my favorite, which I think I may have, here's a great one. There's nothing wrong with you putting together a report, for example, that says why real estate is the greatest investment vehicle of all time. So most millionaires, at the bottom one, I keep seeing the bottom, 90% of all millionaires are created through investing in real estate. This one lacks an email capture, a lead magnet, so I don't know how you would get him up. But if somebody posts, if you can look at this post, it has nothing to do with anything you're doing, you're just telling people why real estate is so great. Another example would be a market. Like if you really think Houston, Texas is a great market, there's nothing wrong with putting together a really detailed report and offering that to people and say, look, this is why I think Houston is smoking hot and I think there's a lot of opportunity. If you want to copy the report, send me your email and I'd be happy to send it to you. Those are ways that you could legitimately get people's information and not be violating, in my opinion, not violating the advertising rules. Now, that does not mean that the minute I get that person email information that I can turn around the next day and send them a deal, right? Remember way back when we were going through the terms, you have to have a pre-existing substantive relationship. So what needs to happen, and I'm not going to talk about it here, I have a YouTube video on it, and I'm happy to do it on the Q&A, but there's about 6 or 7 steps. with the definition of a security that's super broad, in the definition of an offer that's broad, but luckily when it comes to what is a substantive relationship, the SEC has given us some really good guidance, and here are the 7 steps that you have to take somebody that you just met on the on Facebook or at a meetup, or just somebody you don't know, you somehow got their contact info, run them through these 7 steps, and at the end of that process, you will have established a substantive relationship with them. Then you can offer them a future deal, because you have to have a pre-existing substantive relationship, which means pre-existing the current deal. So if you already have a deal, it's too late. Like the minute you start your offering, you can't rely on this pre-existing relationship with people you've never met before. It's impossible. So you could offer them a future deal at that point. But that's the best way to use social media. Add a ton of value. I think LinkedIn does a better job. I don't know if you agree with me, Yona, but I think LinkedIn does a better job than Facebook. If you're on LinkedIn, which you should, you'll see a lot more value add content, because it's more business, and you'll just see people just giving information away free. There's usually not even an email capture. So here's my information, kind of like what I do. Like, here's my flip chart Fridays. Here's a little 3-minute video. And then once in a blue moon, you may have something to offer, like, hey, I've got a new ebook, email me. But that's the way you really do that in between deals, ideally. So when you're in between deals, that's what you're doing. You're just putting out content. Yona can tell you in a different day. Every single day, probably, I've failed miserably at that, Yona. I've kind of tailed off. But consistency is important. But just keep posting value add info and have a way. Look, I'll tell you, just on a personal side, I don't even have to. They know where to find you, by the way. So for me, and I'm sure it's the same for you, like I used to, but I put out a lot of content, and then people just DM me like, hey, I saw the video, great. I have a question, come get on a phone call. Like, I don't even have to give them. I don't have to get their info. They'll just DM you if they see that you're an expert. Obviously we all know Yona's the expert in the cost segregation department. So if I need a cost segregation, even if I don't, I know how to get a hold of Yona. I'll just DM him, right? So that's the whole point here. And then you have this gray area that's the problematics of. There's so much stuff that kind of isn't. I'm sure you guys will have 1,000. Well, what if I do this post? Or what if I do that post? And these are all facts and circumstances, and it's just a gray area. One of my favorite gray areas, if there's even such a word, and I should find a post. I actually have one, but I didn't. I don't know how to blur these things out, so I had my video person blur them. But I'll find one. Another again. Are these what I call it's kind of hard to say, because it's the post-close posts, meaning you've closed on the property and you've seen those posts like, hey, congratulations, I'm so excited, we just closed on this deal, blah, 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 blah. Is that considered conditioning the market? I don't know. That's a little bit tricky. A couple of points on those particular posts. Here's 2 different scenarios, right, on the opposite extremes. One extreme is, I just remember, not everybody does real estate. Like I may have a startup and I just raised a couple $1 million, and I'm posting that I'm so excited that we closed, and I don't plan on raising money ever again, or maybe I end up raising money next year or whatever. Like, that's one scenario. The other scenario is I close and I already got another deal ready to go, and like next week I start promoting that deal. Well, now is this post considered conditioning the market for the next deal? That's kind of the gray. I don't have an answer for you, unfortunately. And that's why I don't like those posts, because I just don't know. Anytime lawyers don't know anything, they get nervous. I will tell you one thing I've seen, or just actually noticed, that is problematic for sure. This is not a gray area. This falls into the clearly you cannot do. And that is, be very careful. There's a difference between closing the property and closing your offering. A lot of times you'll close on a property and you're still a little bit short, which is fine. You got enough money to close the property. You got enough money to pay your closing costs, but maybe you need another 50 grand or 100 grand just to wrap it up, to top it off. Maybe that's how you're going to, your fees might be the last thing to come in. And so you'd make that post, and then a week later, or sometimes it's 2 or 3 weeks later, you get that last $50,000 in. Well, that sale happened 3 weeks later. And now you've blown your 506B exemption for that particular sale because of that post you made, clearly telling the world that you've got this deal. So that one's very dangerous. But assuming you're closing, that posts happen after, you're not raising any more money after that, you could probably argue it more. The further away I think your next deal is, the better. But again, I don't know what there's some branding involved, I guess. But again, the risk reward on those are a little dangerous. So that's really what I wanted to talk about. I've got this video series I did, the social media, which I think I'm going to update, but you can just, probably easier to email me at social premierlawgroup.net to get that video. I'll just automatically send it to you, or that website. But other than that, I really want to do the Q&A because, I don't know, that's fun for me. And this is just kind of where you can find me on social media. I spend a lot of time. It's funny, I wish I spent more. LinkedIn is so amazing. And I just, for some reason, I'm so much more comfortable on, let me get rid of here. I'm so much more comfortable on Facebook that sometimes I post stuff and then don't, how do I, where's my, oh, it's like,
how do you unshare the screen?
I'm trying to find the unshare. Oh, I was like, sorry guys. So that's not that.
Stop sharing. Want me to stop sharing for you?
There it is. There it is. Did you just stop? You're like,
I'll do it for you.
Let's open up Q&A. Look, a lot of the stuff is facts and circumstances. So a lot of it is like, here's my particular scenario. And as long as it's not totally off the beaten path, I'm happy to talk to anybody offline if it's really detailed. But if there's something that popped in, let me know and be happy to address specific questions.
Yeah, so there have been some, first of all, thank you so much. That was incredible. I think you nailed that down to extremely concise. I want to get through these Q&A because there are a lot of great questions here. And I'm sure as we go on, there will probably be more questions. So I'm just going to go back up all the way to the top because there were a lot of questions from the beginning. So
before you do that, I forgot to take the obligatory Yona picture for a Facebook post or a LinkedIn post.
We're not doing a deal, so you can do it.
All right, go ahead.
So we have a great question here from Vivek. The 506B pre-existing relationship, does it need to be a financial or real estate relationship or a personal relationship? Do you have to know what their financial situation is?
Yes. The gist of it, the big picture, the idea behind it is your investors have to be sophisticated. And the definition of that is something along the lines of they have to have sufficient knowledge and expertise in financial and business matters that they can properly evaluate the risks and the merits of your deal. So there is a business and financial component to that. So just because you knew somebody and just played soccer with them for all this time, you have no idea their level of sophistication, that's not going to probably cut it. However, you can probably get away with doing a lot less of those processes because you've known them so well. But you want to put together, and I'm almost close to doing my own little template, and I'll just probably throw it up on my website for people, is you want to have a questionnaire, a very detailed questionnaire about their finances. Are you accredited? Are you not accredited? What's your net worth? What's your income? Have you invested in syndication before? What's your real estate experience? Like all these questions, really detailed. And then you want to get on a phone call with them or a cup of coffee or lunch and probably go through that questionnaire as part of that call. And at that point, by the way, you can easily show them on that conversation, you could show them your current deal. You've got to tell them they're not eligible for it, but you can definitely show them to show them the types of deals that you do. And because they're trying to vet you, like you're vetting them to make sure they're sophisticated and they're trying to vet you. And the SEC has been very clear that there's no magic timeline. There's no 30-day rule. There's no 3-touch date rule. It's the quality of the interactions that matter. And so it is possible for you to do all that in 24 hours. I guess if you send a questionnaire, you get on a phone call, you do all these crazy stuff, and maybe after a day or two, you're like, yep, I know Yona pretty well now. And so I'm going to say that today is the day that I got to know him. But you could also just be on a list for 5 years and you email them once a quarter. That's not going to cut it. So timing is not important. It's the quality of the interactions.
All right, excellent.
That was really helpful.
Yeah, thank you. The next question is, why don't people go for the 506C exemption? And meaning obviously everything we're talking about today, or everything you basically played out about what the 506B and what you can and can't do. So why not just go for that 506C, which is you are allowed to solicit?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm surprised more people don't use 506C because if you're any good at social media, then if you do a 506C, then you can eliminate the presentation I just made. It all goes out the window, other than anti-fraud. So you still can't, you've got to be complete in your posts. So I wouldn't get too deep. People get carried away like the ones we saw. I'm raising money and I'm offering a 12.5% cash on cash and a 30. I'm like, okay, let's just back off there a little bit. Why don't you just give them an idea, give them a link, and then on the link, you can give a little bit more disclaimers. But yeah, so there's two main reasons. One is you're limited to accredited investors only. So you cannot take Aunt Karen, who's not accredited. You have to only accept accredited investors only, which shrinks your pool. You also have to take reasonable steps to verify that they're accredited. You can't take their word for it. So you have to review tax returns or bank statements or real estate appraisals or get a CPA verification letter that tells you that they're accredited. Because of that, I always recommend outsourcing all that work. There's several companies that will do that really inexpensively for $80 to $100 an investor. So I would do that. But then even the pushback I've heard is like if you're a sophisticated investor and you can choose from 10 different deals, and these 2 deals require me to give you all my financials and these don't, all else being equal, I'm like, I'm not going to bother. I don't want to get my 3, whatever. I'm just going to go with these others. But the verification letter is so easy that I don't buy that, but I know that's the argument. And then the accredited. I mean, if you've got people, if your list is full of non-accredited, and then you can't do a 506c.
Gotcha. Okay, and but yeah, obviously, if one does 506c, and is it true that besides for the accredited, is there any more like paperwork that's involved, or does it become more expensive to do a 506c from a legal perspective?
No, the only difference is the expense of the verification company that we'd use. But even that, what I typically recommend people is we have a template for a CPA letter. So I would just have your investors send that CPA verification letter to their CPA, have them put their letterhead on it, have them sign it, and then they're done. And then for those that don't have a CPA or the CPA doesn't want to do it, then you send those remaining people to their verification company. At that point, it may be a little bit more expensive because you're only sending a few. But even at $100 or $120, even $150 an investor, if you've got 5 or 6 investors, you just put that in your budget. I need another $1,000 or $1,500 to verify my investors. It's just part of the underwriting.
Now here's a question, and this is not in the Q&A, just for me. My personal questionnaire over here is, if let's say that you want to do both, okay, is it possible to do some deals a 506B exemption, some deals a 506C exemption, and then really the follow-up question is I'm doing a 506C deal and I'm blasting social media and I'm conditioning the market and everything like that, but I may not say anything about it on social media, but I also have 506B deals going on simultaneously.
And I need to do a video on that too. So there's a concept. So the answer is yes. You can do 2 different deals. Well, first of all, in general, you can definitely do one deal as a 506B, and then the next deal could be a 506C, and the next deal, you can definitely rely on those. There is a concept of integration, and that's what I want to do the video on, where you can't do it just to avoid the rules, right? So I can't do a 506B and then I run up against my 35 limitation, and so then I kind of shut that one down and start another one. That doesn't work. But in general, people switch back and forth. You'd have to, in your specific scenario where you have 2 going on at the same time, you'd have to have like that wall between them. So you'd have to be able to prove, which may or may not be difficult, I don't know. You'd have to prove that the person that came in through your 506B, that you had a pre-existing relationship with that person. They did not find you from the advertising. So that would have to be your burden to show that. But if you can show that, and the way I've seen them do that is with, especially if you've got on platforms, people can check, like, how did they come in? What deal did they look at? So there's ways for you to do that, but you can do that. I thought the other question you would ask, which is a good one, I don't think you asked it, but I'm going to give you credit for it, is what if you start with a 506C and then you want to switch it to a 506B or vice versa? You can go from a 506B to a 506C. You cannot go from a C to a B, because once you do a C, let me just backtrack a little bit. Assuming you started with a C and actually advertised, the minute you advertise that deal, you're not eligible for 506B, so you can't go back. In theory,
you're saying within the same deal.
In the same, if I just changed my mind for some reason. The other way, it is possible as long as you don't have any non-accredited. So if I did look, I can do a 506B with accrediteds only. I don't have to have non-accrediteds. All of the big boys that use 506B, not JP Morgan. I always use the JP Morgan example. BlackRock Real Estate did a $26 billion fund a couple quarters ago, and they did a 506B. I assure you they're all accredited, right? So you don't have to do non-accredited. So if you start a 506B and you've only accepted accredited investors, then you could go to you can be like, oh, I'm a little short. I wanted to raise 2 million. I've only raised 1.5 million. I feel like I need to go advertise. Then you can then switch over to a C. You'd have to then go back and verify all the ones that you're already in, but it is possible to do that switch. It's not possible to go the other way around.
Gotcha. Okay. Awesome. So let's get back to the Q&A over here. Yeah, so Ash asked a similar question over here about what if you're in the middle of multiple deals, projects. So then his question is probably going back into, being on social media, which you advised, if you're doing deals, just stay off. But I see a few people asking, what if you're like always doing deals, right? And I know there's a lot of people, they're always looking at deals, they're always, planning on, trying to put in offers.
Yeah, and that's where you would have to go. Yeah, so then you would have to, if you wanted to take the risk, I still think there's a risk, but I would do the value add. Like if you're doing the value add model where you're clearly not talking about your deals or doing anything, you're just literally adding value as to subject matter or whatever and start that process, then you can get to know them for your next deal. Now there is, I did say, which is true, that when you're trying to establish that substantive relationship, there's no magic timeline, except when which is not what it's not what you answered, but asked. But if it's a continual offering, some people put together funds and they're just always open. In that scenario, you would go through the same process, get to know them, establish a substantive relationship, and that's today. Then the better practice is, and then you wait 30 days before you offer them that particular deal. But obviously, if you have a continual fund, there is no future deal. You're doing it all together. But anyway, I forgot the original question, but I hope that answered it.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions there, so we're gonna go through, try to bring out some other questions and some other answers throughout. So yeah, I did ask a question here. Is there a time period between deals? And I think you touched upon that a little bit, like if you still have the fund open, but in terms of posting, going back to the 506B, of course, our
no, there's no magic. No, there's no magic. I mean, you got to be careful about doing too many deals. I mean, at some point you're doing deals, somebody may think you're in the business of selling securities, and you're in the business of doing the stuff. So that you got to keep that in mind too. But no, there's no magic timeline. I mean, I gave the example of the extreme one where it was clearly 1 week is pretty close. 2 years is fine. But it's all facts and circumstances. It depends on the post. How bad was how bad was the post? How much time? And you have to take in all those facts and circumstances and just make a judgment call.
All right. So someone asked another question here about, can you advertise like the last post? And I think it was referring to the post where the guy was like, I did this 14 unit deal. Like, this was a great deal I did. Like, come invest, talk to me about other deals that I'm going to do in the future. So he asked a question here about referring to that post. Can you advertise with like a different LLC or different company that you didn't do deals, or you're only creating educational videos? Let's say you have like a real estate company or something, and you're advertising, these deals, but it was closed through a different LLC. I don't know if that helps.
I don't think the structure, I always say the structure itself doesn't really matter in all these analysis. The regulators will look right through it. But I think what you're asking is, if you have another, if you have an educational company, for example, and it's whether it's free or you're charging, or it's coaching or whatever, or maybe in your case you have a podcast and you want to advertise the podcast, which that's not going to reference any deals, that's probably okay. But again, you've got to look at the flow. Like I was talking to somebody right before I got on here, and it's like, if you've got a scheme where somebody, you've got a Facebook ad or whatever, and then they come in through this door, but they immediately go to the other door, right? That's where it's not going to work. But if you have a legitimate coaching program or a legitimate something, and at the same time you have an ongoing deal and you want to promote your coaching program, that's fine. But if you just create some random coaching program, get them in there, and then right away they come in through this door, and then you immediately start talking about the other deal, that's where it's not going to look good.
Interesting. So I think that's actually someone else's question over here. similar to that about, when you're just starting out. And I think a lot of people on this call, some people on this call at least might be just starting out, maybe they've done a deal or a couple deals. But, when you're bringing in these investors into your CRM or whatever, how do you come back to them? I think it's a little bit more of a complicated question, but how do you, reapproach them?
With the idea, if the idea is to establish a substantive relationship, you would just, either pick up the phone or email them and say, look, I met you at some conference. I'd love to talk to you for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Or maybe it's a campaign where again, to me, email is no different than social media. So email just happens to be, there's obviously some difference, but it just happens to be a channel. Like you happen to own that channel and you get to control it and it's free. But it's no different than if you post something on LinkedIn, it's no different than posting something on Facebook than it is sending an email with some value add. So the key to emails is to add value, same thing. So maybe your first email isn't, hey, I've got a deal. It probably shouldn't be, hey, I've got a deal, let's talk. It should be, here's information. Look, we're looking at these 3 markets and here's a great report on why these 3 markets are great. Or, hey, somebody mentioned opportunity zones. Like, I don't know if you've heard about opportunity zones, but here's a great webinar that I'm putting together on opportunity zones, or here's an article that somebody wrote on opportunity zones, or, hey, I'm in mobile homes, and I know not too many people know what that is, but here's an article on why mobile homes is such a great asset class. That's the type of emails that you would get. And then obviously at some point, either get them on if you don't have an established relationship, then you're trying to get them on the phone. You're trying to get them to kind of raise their hand and talk to you. And then and you want to keep track of all this too. You've got to document all this, and there's different ways to do it. But you really should segment your email. If you're talking email, there should be a segmented list so that you can email people. At some point, you have a substantive relationship. You would move them in from the sort of the starred, don't send them a deal email list to now they're clean and I have a relationship with them, so I can send them an email list. But at the beginning, I would just send them value add. And then either they'll reach out or you can reach out with a call, or you can then just, hey, I've got a great deal and I'd love to talk to you, or whatever. But you've got to add value. I think that's the bottom line.
Absolutely. So, okay. Okay, that was a big question. So Jerome asked a great question. I have a closed Facebook group, right? Am I allowed to share deals in a closed Facebook group? And I would ask you're shaking your head no, but I would ask a follow-up question to that. What if there was a way that I had a closed Facebook group for my, and I check them off with a kind of a form or the questions to enter the Facebook group, like a form on my website or whatever, that would kind of qualify them as a sophisticated or accredited investor or whatever. So
that's right. That's how you would, but it's not just a questionnaire. If they had to go through those 7 steps, and there may be 6 and stuff, but let's just call them the 7 steps. If the price of entry to that private Facebook group is that you establish a substantive relationship, so that now you know that you have a substantive relationship with everyone in that group, then you have a relationship with them, so you can definitely pitch. Right. The question would be then, can somebody else pitch? Because they don't have a relationship with everybody else. And most likely that might be problematic, but you could certainly create your own group, qualify them, as you mentioned. Now I have a group of 50 or 100 people and I have a relationship with a substantive relationship with all of them, then absolutely you could pitch.
Okay, awesome. I think that covers, oh wait, we have some more questions here. Okay, we have Eric, great introduction over there. Everyone check that out. But we have, how would you choose?
Do you want me to do it verbally?
No, not at the moment.
Okay, sure.
Hold on for a second there, Eric.
No worries.
We're going to do a little of that in a few minutes. So Taiwo asked a question here. Sorry, I think I skipped one up here. Do you have to register each deal separately as 506C, 506B? I think you answered that.
Yeah, you don't register them, but each one is a separate offering. So you'd have to comply with the exemption rules for each individual offering. If they're unless you're doing a fund, which you could, and do multiple properties in one deal, every single deal is separate, and we've got to figure out the exemptions for each individual's offering. They're called offerings.
Oh, here's a good question. Ron asked, from North Carolina, and I may not understand the question entirely, but I think what he's asking is, does personal approaching privately considered syndication? What I think he's asking is, if you approach someone privately to invest in your deal, it's not necessarily an offering, but you're going to individuals to invest with you.
Yeah, I think there's probably some leeway there. I mean, if you're picking up the phone and calling someone, did you advertise? No. One of the things I will say is that I always screw this one up. Having a pre-existing relationship, a pre-existing substantive relationship, makes you consider not advertising. But it's not the only way to do it, right? There are other ways. I was going to say something cute, and I don't know if it works anyway, but that's not the only way. The rule is you cannot advertise, right? If you can show you have a pre-existing substantive relationship, then obviously by definition you haven't. But if you can if somebody knocks on your door randomly, the pizza man, and says, "Hey, do you have a deal?" That technically, that would not be, I think referrals are also a good way too. If you've got an investor in your deal and you reach out to them and they're like, "Hey, I'm definitely in. And by the way, I think my cousin Johnny, this might be something interesting to him. Do you mind if I pass it on?" And they make an introduction. You don't have a relationship with that person, but you also didn't advertise to that person. So that can get abused, but if that's what happened, that's probably a good way to do it. So I think if you pick up the phone, or you literally just meet somebody at a conference and just privately have a conversation right then and there, there's other ways. Again, there's other exemptions too, so that we may even be able to squeeze in some other way of doing it that's not necessarily a 506B or C, but still is an exempt offering.
And there are a bunch of other questions here. I don't know how much time you have. I don't know how much time.
A few minutes. I can go about just maybe another 5 minutes or 5-10 minutes.
Okay. So someone asked actually a really good question here about, I don't know if you want to go into it because it is a little off the topic, but about the benefits of the Reg A via the Jobs Act.
Yeah, look, I did a video on this too on YouTube, and when you start describing Reg A, it's Reg A plus that we're really talking. There is actually two Reg A's, called Tier 1, Tier 2, but we just call them Reg A, which has been around for many, many years and nobody used. And then there's Reg A plus, which is relatively new. That's the kind of exciting one. Let me just start by telling you what it is, and you're gonna be like, Mauricio, this is awesome. Like, why does this not come up? So with a Reg A plus, you cannot raise unlimited, but you can raise up to 50 million bucks. That's pretty good. So most of us don't have a problem there. 50 million bucks. You can advertise, great, and you can take non-accredited investors. So I can pretty much raise most of the money, or all the money I really need. I can advertise, and I can take non-accredited. Now, there's some limitations on the non-accredited. I'm limited to 10% of their income or net worth, whatever's greatest. But still, I can offer it to Aunt Karen, and she can invest for $5,000 or $10,000, and I can advertise. So, Mauricio, why is this not being brought up? And the catch is, or the catches are, well, let me just start with cost. It costs 5x what a normal syndication would cost. It's a normal cost of syndication, give or take, it maybe 15 grand. A Reg A is going to end up costing you, between legal fees and everything else I'm going to talk about, probably 70, right? So that's one. So if you're raising $1 million, that probably doesn't make any sense. Even 5 million may not make sense. There's a compliance cost much higher. Why? Because we're kind of registering it. We call it a mini registration. We don't fully register it, but we do have to get approval from the SEC. So it takes a long time. It takes 6 months. Let's just call it 6 months. So if you're in contract, again, closing on a building, and you've got 90 days to close, you don't have time to go through the SEC process and wait. Even though it's 6 months, it's not 2 years and $1 million. It's 6 months and 80 grand. You don't have that time. So it really only works, in my opinion, with funds. So if you're putting together a fund, there's no deadline, there's no closing date, then you can start that process, and 6 months later, it'll get approved at some point, and then you can market it. And so that's the main limitation. And the reason it's so expensive is because now government lawyers look at it, then they send you comments, you got to work on it. You're negotiating with the lawyers, and they're asking you to do that. And it's back and forth for 6 months. So it's much more time intensive than a regular one. And then there's all the compliance, right? Now there's, annual reports, semi-annual reports, quarterly reports, entry reports, exit reports, audited financials, like all the compliance, which just comes to a cost. It's not as bad as if you're a public company, but there is quite a bit of compliance. So those are the reasons. But we definitely do some. I mean, if you're going to raise a fund, you might as well make it 20, 30, 40, 50 million, even if you don't get there. And if you've got all the time in the world, and you're thinking, especially now, if you're thinking, hey, I think that down the road, end of the year or maybe next year, there's going to be some great opportunities for me. Why don't I start the process now, so that when it gets done, like if we started it today, it'll probably get done by the end of the year or beginning of next year. Now you're ready to go and you can advertise and you can do all these great things and take accredited and non-accredited.
Yeah, excellent question. So a few more questions here. One, I see someone asked me privately, but a good question is, what's the process of registering the exemption with the SEC?
Again, there's no registration, so we don't register it. The only thing that we file with the SEC is actually a notice filing. It's called a Form D. If you're doing a Reg D, a 506B or 506C, we file a Reg D. I'm sorry, we write a Form D. That's just noted. It just tells them, hey, I'm raising $1 million, and there's a couple of non-accrediteds. It's a 506B. It's like all these statistics. It's really not, you do need to have, I think, a rocket science degree, engineering degree to figure out their website to do it all. But the actual form is super simple. And then a copy of that gets filed with the states along with a couple $100. But there's no formal filing. You know, when we put together what we call the offering documentation, the PPM, the private placement memorandum, and the operating agreement, and the subscription agreement, all those documents, we don't ask for any approval. We just prepare them, and then they go to the investors, and you're done. Like there's no filing. So there is no process for a filing. On a Reg A, it's different. On a Reg A, we have a what's called a registrar statement, an A1, and then we file that, and we wait 30 days, and they come back. Like I'm in the middle of one right now, and it's like, what about this? What about that? And let me see this. Let me look at that. Like they're just trying to get their mind around it, and you're trying to explain to some SEC government lawyer why your deal and why it makes sense.
Okay, another great question here about what do you think about investor pitches at sessions at conferences? So this is more obviously less real estate related. It happens less in real estate. But.
Yeah, there is what's the term? I don't usually get into it that much. In generally, that would be considered general solicitation. But there is something technically called I think it's a road show, but it usually happens on the security side. Like if you're a financial services or you've got some security you're offering, and people do like this dog and pony show that they go around doing these road I think they're called road shows.
Road show, yeah.
But that's not my world. I mean, my world is real estate and then a little bit more. So going to a conference and, for example, setting up a booth, which you can easily do, right? You pay a couple grand or whatever. You set up a booth at this conference where you have all this traffic. You can't be pitching your deal at that one. You can start conversations. You can maybe your thing is self-storage, and so you have a big thing on self-storage and why self-storage is such a great investment. And then for more information, get their card. And then when you go home, you start that process of getting to know them. But you can't be passing out a one sheet with investment. Hey, yeah, we've got a fund, we're raising money. That would be a type of solicitation. Which if you're doing a 506C, that's fine, and even a Reg A, that's fine. But if you're doing a 506B that prohibits advertising and soliciting, that would be prohibited.
Okay, awesome. I think that's, wait 1 second. Do I need to disclose on the executive summary if it's a 506C? That's a good question.
No, nope. I would recommend that if you're, here's a good practice tip. If you're doing a 506C and you're posting something on social media, I would make it clear that it's a 506C, because I've seen situations where somebody complains, or maybe there is a regulator that just came across your post and they open up, they call you, they write you a letter, and it may be all fine, but that's after you spend a couple of grand on legal fees and you had to like deal with it and all the time it took and responding and stuff. So just most people will say at least, hey, it's for accredited investors only. That's usually a good tip off that it's a 506C. I personally would put, hey, this is a 506C, so only accrediteds, please, or something like that. So it's very clear that it's a 506C deal. But not on the executive summary. We don't need to put anything there.
Amazing. I think some of these questions aren't some of the other things here aren't necessarily totally relevant to our discussion here. So I want to keep it a little more focused, but we're going to break off into the breakout rooms here now, just in another minute or so. So Maurice, I wanted to thank you. Definitely welcome to stay on and join in this networking session if you choose to, and anyone else is welcome to stay or go. At this point, like what we do every time is we'll just break out into groups of 3 or 4, and you'll hit the button that says you'll join the room, and then you'll end up with 3 or 4 people. It's not totally random, so you might be with people that you were with last week. But what I like to do, and if you haven't done this before, it's really cool. Once you join that room, you got like 3 or 4 people, together, and you don't know each other yet. What I highly recommend is first open another tab on your screen. Okay, open up LinkedIn, and connect with each other all the way there, so you guys can continue the conversation afterwards. You're not just like, you know, who was that person I spoke to, Yona? I don't get these messages like, do you remember that guy? You know. Anyways, that's what you should do. Introduce each other. I really appreciate you guys coming, and you know, now's the time really to network and to. I hope we got value from this. Next week, if anyone's jumping off now, be sure to join us. Adam AAA Adams is going to be joining us, talking about the 4 pillars of influence. Right? If anyone knows Adam, he's you know, just an incredible, you know, influencer and a great person to know. So I'm really excited about that. Please join us then. If you have any questions or suggestions in the future, feel free to hit me up. You know where to find me. And if you're not part of our brand new Facebook group, I'm not going to be posting any deals there, but you should just check that out. It's going to be fun. And don't forget the Weiss Advice podcast launching tomorrow morning. Really appreciate you guys coming out, and we're just going to jump into that. So again, enjoy the networking. We'll do it probably about 10, 15 minutes. Bring everyone back here to the main screen. And then if we have time and everyone wants, we can do it again, or we can call it a night.
Thank you, Yona.
My pleasure. Thank you guys. So I see people are jumping off like hot flies over here. That's not even a word, hot flies, but they're jumping.
How's it going? How are you breaking out
the best
everything?
part, man.
This is the best part. I know. Okay, so we'll just do like this. Oh, how am I doing this, Eric? You're gonna see. I'm gonna click a button.
Where are you guys from?
On your screen. There we go.
Where are you from, Yona?
I'm originally from Southern California, but we're gonna do this in smaller groups right now, Eric. So hold your horses.
I'm from Southern California too.
Oh yeah? Oh cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Orange County.
Orange
Cool.
County.
All right.
Nice.
Looking forward to chatting with everybody.
Okay.